As we hope you know, our NSCI community stands together as an inclusive community in so many ways. Our values speak to each individual created B'Tselem Elohim in the image of the divine. Consequently, we treat one another with dignity and equality always. The words on our large sanctuary wall call us to act with kindness and justice and humility, and our Perlman sanctuary walls call out holiness, kindness, justice, humility, holiness. These are fundamental Jewish values, and they guide our congregation in how we speak and how we act. So tonight, we celebrate the diversity of our community as we mark Pride Shabbat here at NSCI, I believe for the 10th year. Though we regularly include readings and music composed by members of the LGBTQ+ community, tonight we give them extra elevation with gratitude and appreciation for their contributions. We would not be who we are without them. We also take time to elevate the voices of members of our community who identify in the LGBTQ+ community, their family members, and their friends. The voices we raise tonight are clear and they are proud, as are we. And they are but a part of those in our community, each and every one of whom matters and make up beautiful strands of the communal fabric that is NSCI. For everyone in our community, we see you. You are valued here. We will not erase anyone here, ever. Which gives me the great pleasure to introduce one of the all-time great people in this community, Dani Glass. So Dani, come on up and I get to introduce you. So Dani, a child of North Shore Congregation Israel in every way. I have Dani's somewhat official bio here, and then I'll offer some personal anecdotes along the way. Dani went to college originally to be a high school English teacher. They are truly an educator, but quickly fell in love with early childhood education. Dani has taught in Jewish preschool classrooms as well as kindergarten, where they are now. They love using books and the outdoors as tools for the education of young children. Dani has spent time volunteering with nonprofits, most notably Ultimate Peace, an organization working to bring youth of all backgrounds together in Israel. Dani and their family brought Ultimate Peace here, actually, not so many years ago, and we are thinking of all of those participants in Ultimate Peace, certainly this night. In addition, Dani participates in Pride and Less Prejudice, an organization devoted to providing free, inclusive literature to preschool and elementary school classrooms. Dani loves to read, spend time outside in nature, and cook for the people they love. I've known Dani, I think, 24 years, so probably literally since the entirety of my rabbinate here at North Shore Congregation Israel. So since they were very, very young, and have gotten to watch them grow up into the incredible person they are. And I had the great honor of marrying Dani and Shauna not so long ago, which was pretty awesome. So with no further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Dani to speak.
Thank you. I'm not so sure how to use a microphone. Usually I just use my teacher voice. Hi, I'm Dani Glass, and as previously mentioned, I am an early childhood educator, so much of the following will reflect on my experience working with children in Jewish schools. I taught preschool for 7 years just down the road at Moriah, and now I teach kindergarten at Bernard Zell on Chiamet Day School in Chicago. Working with children in a Jewish setting has really impacted my relationship with Judaism in myriad ways, ultimately bringing me much closer to it than I believe I ever would have been otherwise. The bluntness of children and the way that they ask questions and inquire deeply has also been cause for reflection for me in the realm of Jewish upbringings, gender, identity, and the status quo. My family has belonged to NSCI for my whole life, and really for much of my parents' lives. They were even married in the large sanctuary. I grew up with a modern and inclusive understanding of religion. I have to be honest and say that I've always held religion a little distantly and with a little bit of distrust, but NSCI has consistently shown me that religion itself isn't the problem. When it is practiced with love, when it is practiced with reflection of the modern world, and when its leaders value the unique perspectives that different people bring with them, it can be a place where someone like me can feel welcome. So welcomed that when my partner and I decided to get married in December, this was the perfect place to do it. And how beautiful that we married one another on the bima in the same place that my parents did when they said their vows. A significant part of my connection to Judaism is feeling connected to something larger, to know and understand and pass down what I know and understand to the next generation. It feels like a responsibility and an opportunity to pass along the Judaism that I know, the one where questioning is necessary, where storytelling is an art, and where tradition is honored and kept inclusive and meaningful in a way that is consistent with modern life.
We got you. It's all the pride. Pride is just
There we go.
so good.
All right. A little comedic relief. So that's enough context. Let's fast forward to some of my work with children in Jewish early childhood settings. I'll tell you some of my favorite questions I've had from children. Where's the air? What's a pickle before it's a pickle? A cucumber. What's a turkey sandwich before it's a turkey sandwich? I sidestepped that one. Why do trees growing? Who attacks your heart when you have a heart attack? Are you a boy or a girl? Now onto the more Jewish ones. Why is the Passover story so weird? How did the first person get alive? How did the Pharaoh who was good have a kid who was bad? How did God make stuff? Why did God make someone mean? Why did God choose to make bad things happen to people? How old is God? And is God a boy or a girl? Now, with younger kids, I often simply return the question to them. When they ask if I'm a boy or a girl, I ask, what do you think? They respond with their own thoughts, which, number one, I'm always fascinated to hear. And then they move right on, ready to show off a new skill or go back to playing. I do the same when they ask whether God is a boy or a girl. I say, what do you think? They give their answer, then move right on, ready to show off a new skill or go back to playing. Returning the question is a developmentally appropriate practice because our job is to give them opportunities to think deeply and to trust their own thoughts. And they're usually satisfied with their own thoughts. Not as much, though, in kindergarten. When a kindergartner asks, is God a boy or a girl? They really want to hear what you have to say. And responding in kind is a developmentally appropriate practice because what they need at this age is to begin figuring out how to piece the world together and how to make sense of things so much bigger than themselves. The Jewish studies teacher I work with this year has a beautifully honest, thoughtful, and understandable response to the question, is God a boy or a girl? I never really knew the best way to respond to that question before hearing hers. She says, God isn't a boy or a girl. God is God. God is above us. Besides, we know it says in the Torah that God made all people in God's image. So if there are people of all genders and we were all made in God's image, then God can't be just a boy or just a girl. She acknowledges that while we do say he and him when we refer to God, it doesn't mean that God is a boy. It just happens to be the language that we use. I love this answer because it's simple and it makes sense. It brings concreteness to the ethereal. It applies logic while still respecting that God is beyond logic. Regardless of whether or not you believe in God or you practice Judaism religiously, this response gives clarity in a thoughtful and clear way. Now, one day this year, I overheard a conversation in the lunchroom between a few kids in my class. They were having a conversation. Again, this was in the lunchroom. No teachers were really nearby. I just happened to be walking by and catch this. They were having a conversation about God's pronouns. They decided that God, and I quote, God must be a they because God isn't a boy or a girl. I told the Jewish studies teacher about this conversation, and she reflected that while she's had the is God a boy or a girl question and conversation many times over the years, she's never heard kids discussing God's pronouns until now, until after they met me and had had many conversations about how I go by they or them because I'm not a boy or a girl. We reflected together about how their exposure to gender-neutral pronouns made this idea of God as something beyond gender more accessible to them. They had more of a framework, not because they were comparing me to God, but because they already had a concept of gender outside the binary script that most of us have grown up with. Children's inquiry is perhaps my favorite part of my job. It makes me think differently and more deeply about the world. Their questions help us see past the knowledge and information that we take for granted. Their questions ultimately, and it doesn't matter how old they are, lead to the same wonderings. How and why does the world work the way it does? What explains, well, everything? How can I understand the world around me in a concrete and manageable way? I think most adults have the same kinds of questions. And I think it's incredibly special and unique that Judaism encourages us to ask, to ponder over different responses, to think deeply about the responses that we may not have ever considered before. I wasn't raised religiously, but Judaism absolutely played a role in my upbringing. I was raised to have a healthy suspicion of authority. Thanks, Dad. I was raised to make my own decisions. I always knew that the response, but everyone else was doing it, just wasn't gonna cut it. My choices were my own and nobody else's. Thanks, Mom. I was expected to question. I was expected to think deeply. These expectations that my parents had of me are expectations that are put upon Jews simply by product of being Jews. They may not have consciously raised me with these expectations because they were Jewish, but we cannot deny the large role that our Jewishness played in that. Culturally, we are supposed to question and think for ourselves. I didn't always understand who I was. There wasn't always language like non-binary or genderqueer, and there weren't always people like me in the public view whom I could look up to or relate to or understand. But I always questioned gender roles. I always questioned what I was supposed to do as someone who didn't quite fit in as a boy or as a girl. I always questioned why boys were expected to be one way and girls another. And I think the culture in which I was raised facilitated that questioning. Many people are raised being told that this or that is how the world is, and your job is simply to accept it as a fact of life. But my Jewishness, or at least the type of Jewishness that I experienced in my life, made it feel more okay for me to feel outside the status quo and to exist as something most people, including myself, hadn't ever really considered. And the more we consider, the more we expand our thinking, not just about gender, but about any of those big questions my students have asked me, the more deeply we can connect to the world around us. The more we expand our thinking, the more open and inclusive and deeply thoughtful we will be as humans. I'll bring it back around to the kindergarten conversation about God being a they. I'm not trying to change God's pronouns here, but I am going to reflect about how the presence of a non-binary person in the lives of these children has changed their framework for concretifying the concept of God. When children ask questions like, is God a boy or a girl, it's not necessarily because they're curious just about God's gender. It's because they're trying to make an extremely abstract concept concrete enough to connect to. The conversations we had about my identity and my pronouns helped make God a little more understandable for them and a little easier to relate to. Now, I'm not giving myself all the credit here. I just happen to be who I am, and I happened to be their teacher. But it's interesting how, when we're forward and honest about who we are, we can pave the way for a different and often more accessible path to understanding.
Who are you, Dani Glass? Thank you. Just stay with me for 1 second. Dani, thank you so much for being just the consummate educator that you always are. You know, you carry that with you wherever you go and however it is that you bring your wisdom to community. And we are grateful for you being not only our speaker this night, but really our teacher in so many ways. And you invited us into a space of reflection in our own lives, our own spirituality, by sharing your story, a story that is beautiful and important and part of who we are, and we don't take it for granted that it is a time in our world where it is probably not the easiest story to tell. So it takes a lot of courage and bravery also to stand in community, to trust community, and to be a part of our community with incredible pride and giving nature. We are so grateful to you today and always. Thank you so much. Give them one more applause.